Cremona. The city, which is also known as the City of Violins, is the world's leading center for violin making. The art of Cremona's violin making is so prestigious that it was included in the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage List in 2012. In this episode of the Soham Roy Show, we have with us one of the finest luthiers of our generation, Mr. Edgar Russ. Edgar, welcome to our show.
Hello, nice to meet you. Hello to everyone.
So how are you doing, Edgar?
I'm doing fine, very fine. I'm here in Cremona, Italy. I think we are 3.5 hours before you in Calcutta, right? So, yeah.
Right. So tell us a bit about your journey. What inspired you to be a violin maker?
As the smallest of 5 children who were born in 6 years in Austria, I always wanted to make a little bit more noise than the other ones, to get a little bit more attention. And probably this is the main reason that I was attracted in building instruments. But from the very childhood on, we always did a lot of things with our hands. We were talking about a time where there were no video games and things like this existed at all. And my mother was a little bit more artist, and my father was a surgery and had a private clinic, and he thought that we all become doctors. But actually, this fact to build something yourself is very satisfying. At least I thought it was something very nice. So after high school, actually, I was focusing more on instrument making. With 12 years, something like this, I started to make my first even flutes I made, and even tiny drums and all kind of things. But beside of marble making, boats and radio controlled cars and all these kind of things. And so there was a little bit something that I had a lot of satisfaction to do things with my hands. And then with 13 years, I started to make a guitar, a classical guitar. And that was something really super interesting and that attracted me. So then I had to adjust the guitars of my friends, and then they showed up with electric guitars. I even made my pickups for these electric guitars at that time myself and things like this. So this was a little bit at the time before I came to Cremona. And then I came with 17 years to Cremona, where there were all these violin makers. At the time, it was like the capital with 36 violin makers. Now we're like 190. Yeah. But at that time, it seemed so many violin makers already. And we're talking about 1984. Yeah. That was the year where I came to Cremona. And yeah, from that on, then actually this violin making captured me like an octopus, and I got more and more into it. I made the violin making school here in Cremona. At the time, that was 4 years. Now I think it is 5 years. But at the time, it was 4 years, and we had more lessons in workshop. My master was Riccardo Bergonzi, and it was a very nice environment in our class. We were from all nations, from Germany, France, Taiwan, Japan, Costa Rica, what else? We were a lot of students. It was a pretty sparkling environment to learn. And so it was just good. And I was actually thinking, after violin making school, I will leave immediately Italy. I was the one who was screaming the loudest. But then at the very end, as you see, I stayed here. I went to the States. I worked a lot also in the States, a little bit here and a little bit there. I worked with Greg Alf in Ann Arbor and Joe Curtin. I worked with Carl Becker in Chicago, also with Julie Reed. She was the boss of Machold Rare Violins at that time in New York. And yeah, so I tried to still, while I had my company already open, I tried to learn far out. I went to the Varnish seminar, Varnix 2000, which was organized by Marco Copiardi in the year 2000. And we all went to Costa Rica to cook varnish on the beach. lessons for an entire week inside of the hotel. Outside was nice weather, and we were sitting inside and doing this. So I still try to do as many things as possible to not to just continue doing, because the world keeps on proceeding, and you have to follow up with what's happening around you. Yeah,
Absolutely. That is so true. So why did you choose Cremona to be a workplace? Was the decision being influenced by the fact that Cremona has the essence of one of the great luthiers or violin makers like the Stradivari Amati or the Guarneri?
Yes and no, because your question is somehow a little bit, for me, wrong, because actually the violin making school in Cremona has been made because of Stradivari, Amati, Guarneri, and all that. Right. And me, myself, actually, I decided to go to Cremona because it was the only option which I had. There was the other option was in Germany, and in Germany, they are really very square. And they just said, we accept per school year 2 foreigners, and somebody from Austria was definitely already foreigner, and people outside of Bavaria, where this region in Germany, somebody from north of Germany or Berlin or Hamburg or Frankfurt was already for them like a foreigner. So it was kind of impossible to get into the school. You had to have some friends who are already in the trade or something. I was just Mr. Nobody. So Cremona, they just opened the door enough that you talk Italian, and then you can do the school. And it's still like this. Actually, the school doesn't cost you anything. You just have to move here, show them that you are willing to learn the trade, and then you find an apartment and you make your living and go to the school. This is still like this. Yeah.
So there are a lot of schools of violin making. So which school of violin making do you follow and why?
There are lots of schools in violin making who teach you the trade. But when I think of what kind of icon or idol you have when you look at the instrument itself, it's definitely Stradivari. Now, people would say, oh, and Amati. Amati was before Stradivari. And Guarneri was more or less in these years of Stradivari. There was also in the last years of Stradivari, there was also 10 years of Guarneri. But Guarneri is not really a school. Guarneri, when you look at it, is really very rough and has nothing to do with Stradivari. Guarneri was not famous when he was working during his lifetime, and only because of a matter of luck, let's call it, that Paganini played a Guarneri violin. Guarneri, at a certain point, was taken for important and outstanding master, but Guarneri was not outstanding in the craftsmanship, how we would say he is a great master. Then he became a great master because his sound, actually, in the last years, we have seen that our sound idol has changed over the last years. And more we see that this Guarneri model is more and more is better to satisfy our nowadays sound perception. But Stradivari is actually the master, the maker. You can really see that he is extremely patron of his craft. He is a real master, even after hundreds of years. If you look at it, there is no machine who can remake something like he made it. I just, while we had a short break, I went slowly to fetch this book. I don't know if you can see that. There are these decorations on there's a window, but there are these decorations, and these are the Stradivari decorations of his instruments. And when you make a copy of a decorated Stradivari, then actually you understand how good he was. There are these kind of small flowers he carved into the wood. And even it is only black on the maple, these flowers get three-dimensional how he carved it inside. there are a lot of people who make these instruments, these decorated, but to be as good as Stradivari, you realize what a real great craftsman he was. So for me, it's many violin making schools in the world, the Germans, French, United States, in Chicago, Salt Lake City, and in Austria, in Hallein, and in Italy, here in Cremona, and in Florence and everything. But the master in our trade will remain always Stradivari, because it's just outstanding what he how good he was able to create instruments. Yeah.
Right. So as you said that you started off with building the classical guitar at a very young age. So as we all know, the classical guitar, the sound projection of the classical guitar is very mellow. Rather than the sound projection of a violin is very shrill, and a person can distance from here the shrill and actually can feel the shrill of that violin. So was there any challenges involved when you just switched from building a classical guitar to a violin?
At the time when I changed from classical guitar to violin, I was not able to have everything under control how I have it right now. So I would say that would make things sound very interesting for the audience here now. But it's now that years passed by, over 40 years. At the time I switched from guitar to violin, I was far away in being able to put things into reality, and I just obtained a sound, and you certainly try to give your best, which every beginner, everybody who makes a few instruments does. But to become really that good that you can satisfy the customer's requests right away from one instrument to another, make the same model in one direction or another one, make it more beautiful, more louder on the G string, equilibrate here, or just raise the volume of one string or things like that. That takes you years of experience. And there are no shortcuts that you can just make like here now. The violin making school of Cremona, you cannot make the school here in Cremona and then you come out and you are able to build an instrument which satisfies right away all the customers. This is it's not so easy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've been in the business for more than 40 years in the violin making. So what factors decide the choice of woods for you? It's always big questions, you know. If I wouldn't have to say anything, that I wouldn't say anything. But everything has a huge story, and I try to make it as compact as possible. Well, the whole thing I just started with violin making, and my father gave me at that time 10,000 German marks. That was like the money at that time for a small car. Okay. And then he said, you know, violin making, everything depends on good wood. I read that. So go and buy some good wood, because in a few years when you need it, you need it. And so it's better to buy it today. So then I took my small car and I went from Austria up to Germany, where only in Germany there were the best wood dealers. Okay. So that's not because the wood comes from Germany, but the Germans had in Bosnia, where the best maple tree is growing, they had the contracts to these people in Bosnia to get the wood. So you had to go to Germany to pick out the wood, and then you brought it back to Italy. And so I went up to Germany, went to Bubenreuth in Germany, and there were the ones who made like 40,000 instruments a year with machinery. But the nicest pieces, they knew already, people from Italy come and pick these woods and pay whatever you have to pay. So for 10,000 German marks, I realized to get my car full with wood. And I remember by going back to Italy, I had to pass through Austria, and I stopped by at my parents' place, and my father looked into the car and was slightly disappointed how few pieces I only got for so much money. But
after all, this wood helped me for a few years, and I actually started to buy my wood myself. One thing for the maple is very important to have maple from Bosnia and not from the Carpathian, from Romania, where the wood is definitely grown different. It's less compact. It's a little bit like paper somehow, we have the impression. And that makes immediately an impact on the quality of especially on a violin. On a cello, the wood influences a little bit less, because the bigger the instrument becomes, the less the property of the wood influences the sound. While on a violin, every single small thing, you really have to be very picky to get the maximum out of it. And the spruce, from the very beginning, I went up. I read already at that time that the great masters, Stradivari, Guarneri, Amati, they all got the best tone wood from Val di Fiemme. And Val di Fiemme is a valley. The Fiemme Valley is from Bozen, Bolzano, north of Italy. You go up to the mountains and you get the trees there. So I went immediately there once in autumn, talked to a sawmill in Latemar, in Paneveggio. I talked to them and they said, yeah, come in January and we will put a few trees on the side, and then you come and then you can choose out of these trees. So there are some makers who go themselves into the wood and then they start to search trees and things like this. But again, this is not really your profession, and I prefer to rely on people who work in the forests. They know the whole forest. They know exactly where the best trees are growing. If they grow too close to each other, they start to turn, which is not good for the spruce. And so they know exactly where to find the best trees. They cut them, they put them aside. When you go there, the tree is still frozen. And then you can just, by tapping slightly on it, without that only the skin is tapping on the other side of the tree, then you can hear how it sings or does not sing. And you certainly want something which is having a nice tone, singing, and then you pick that tree. Then you pick that tree, you pay for it first, and then they will cut it open, yeah? Otherwise, they don't cut it for you. Because for instrument making, the tree, the round tree, is cut in splits like this and not in just straight through. And that makes the huge difference for the price of the spruce. Spruce actually is not so expensive. And so I bought all together in my life about 6 trees of spruce, thousands of tops for violins and cello. And now I'm slowly seeing that it gets a little bit smaller, but now I have already almost not 60, but 57 years. So you need also the room to find all this, the right location to season your wood. But I love to use my own spruce, and the maple I buy piece by piece. That's, I think, the best choice for the wood.
Right. So Edgar, your violin making career spans over more than 40 years. And in this huge span of years, you have come across one of the finest violins and also have done repairs on one of the finest violins. So what qualities do you look for in a violin? And what do you say about the term a perfect violin? What does that mean to you?
A perfect violin, you have to imagine that the violin is a little bit like a turtle. Yeah, it's many collectors collect them without being able to play a violin. And if you look at the violin, there is no straight line. And this makes the whole object itself very interesting. And on the other side, makes the whole object also a little bit complicated. Because every time you have physics and a mechanical machine which has to work properly, just think of an engine of a car. I know musicians don't even consider an engine of a car, but actually a violin is nothing else than also a small mechanical machinery which needs to work properly, and there are specific dimensions and ratios in order that this small machinery works to its perfection. And when I have to adjust, let's say, an old instrument, and I have to increase its sound property, then certainly I try to apply my rules, how this has to work. And you always have to make some compromises. So one thing is, of course, that you have to measure the whole instrument and then see how you can line up the instrument to its perfection in order that all four strings sound properly, react in the same way, and the sound post fit it perfectly in order that at the time the musician comes, that we can adjust the sound, this machinery, exactly to the requirements of the musician. Just think a little bit like on when they make a Formula One race, let's say. I know that musicians don't want to hear about it, but as a sports car driver does nothing else that he's checking how this car is working for that racetrack, and then he makes a few turns around, goes back to his box. There are the mechanics. In my case, I'm the violin making, I'm the maker, and then he tells them what works, what does not, and then they adjust everything. And there's about how the tires are, and an instrument is not far away of this. I know it seems very completely different worlds, but it is nothing else than a mechanical object which you have a little bit be able to understand the musician, what he is telling you, how it responds, what he hears, what you hear. And sometimes I'm even earlier than the musician, that I tell him already what we have to adjust after I see him playing. I try certainly to adjust the instrument right away, that when they come, they pick it up and it's all perfect. But the better the musician is, the less it is possible to capture exactly his requirements, because it's my duty and my job to see him playing and recognize immediately what can be adjusted even better. And actually, this adjusting is a never-ending job. It's just a question of how much time you want to dedicate, and you can make it as good as possible. Nowadays, it's just difficult. You pay rent, you have your employees and everything. So you need to, sorry, I get here a lot of messages, sorry. You have to be able to interpret, understand their comment, what they want, how they perceive it. It's a very interesting trade. Some violin makers say that the instrument sounds how it sounds, and then you have just to find the right musician.
Right.
I don't really believe in that. If it's for a certain price range, it might fit like this. And if you just want to be quick, then you have 20 violins and pick one you like. Yeah. But every instrument actually can be adjusted better to this specific musician, this specific bow he's using, this specific style of music he's playing. Yeah. And this is my work, and that's something I really love to do. It's very satisfying that when you have musicians who go out and then they're happy. On the other side, the better you do it, the more it's very likely that the musician very soon is coming back to you again, because there is another small tiny problem. Just think of a nice Mercedes S-Class. I hope you have that in India as well. Now, just think of this great car. You're sitting inside and everything is silent. It's a perfect car, and this is how it should be, right? And then just think of one window is just a little bit open. And now you're driving, you're great. It's still a great car, but this of this air, it's just, it's worse than a mosquito, yeah. And so you qualify. The more you go up in sound, the more you qualify for tiny things, which on a small Tada, I don't know, the cheapest car you can find, is not a problem because it's just, oh, it's all fine. And then, wow, you open the windows, no air condition, and it's a completely different world. And with violin making, it's the same. If you buy a $100 Chinese violin, you are happy that you have a violin and you can play on it. And then it's also great, but it has nothing to do with a violin which costs, let's say, 30, 40, or 50,000 euro. Yeah.
Absolutely. Your explanation was so stellar that I was literally visualizing all that you were saying, and so fun. So, Edgar, recently you have finished building the world's most precious violin, the Osmium Violin. Can you tell us the story behind such a unique build of the century?
My enthusiasm and my pleasure to see decorated instruments starts already when I came here to Cremona to the violin making school. And I think it was in 1987 or 86, something like this. There was the Stradivari anniversary exhibition. And there that it was that I have seen my first decorated instruments of Stradivari. And I thought this is just so amazing that I was really attracted. So by the time I was in third class, I started to make my first decorated instrument. And I sold it at that time for good money. But it was an outstanding instrument. It was not only beautiful, it was also good sounding. And I always thought it is very nice if you have a good sounding instrument and it's also decorated, that this is the maximum you can do. And then it happened to me that I made a few copies of these decorated Stradivarius, the Hellier. In the internet, there are some videos on my YouTube channel as well. You can see what I'm talking about. And about 12 years ago, at this request of the Sultan of Oman, bin Zayed Qaboos, who wanted me to make him his personal violin. So this personal violin of him, at the time, I decorated with 427 diamonds, 70 rubies, 17 saberites. And I made it as good as possible. And it really sounded also very, very good. So I have to show you here just a short few here. This is actually pictures of that violin where I made it. And here you see me counting the diamonds. And here, I don't know, it's reflecting a lot, but you can see along the edge on the double purfling where I inserted here diamonds and gold inlays in the fingerboard and things like this. I decorated the ribs. I put it the purfling with pure gold. And here you see the many diamonds. They were all captured in gold. That was a violin which I made for the Sultan of Oman in 2012. And so I had already a certain, let's say, experience in doing something like this. And then a friend of mine from Austria showed up and visited me. I made high school with him. And he told me that he has another friend who is just dealing with osmium. I didn't even know what osmium is. And we talked about the whole project, and then they asked me to make a rendering on the computer on an instrument which is decorated with this osmium. So then I just designed and did a little bit of things. I enjoyed it, and I thought that they will take this plan and these pictures of my rendering to show it to potential customers. And a month later, they told me, okay, Edgar, we're going to do it. You can build that instrument. And I was just, how are we going to do that? We don't, do you have that much money for this osmium and the diamonds, and how does this work? And then he told me, you take care of the gold and the diamonds and the violin and everything, and we take care of the osmium. And they found the partners and everything. And so we created now with the Osmium Institute, which is a German company who makes out of this poison raw osmium, which is a brownish colored dust, and they put it under high pressure, with high temperature over several weeks, I guess, and then it becomes crystalline. And this crystalline osmium is not toxic anymore, has an appearance similar like many diamonds on a surface, and they produce it in different colors and different grades and everything, and they try to find all the right material with the same quality and cut out all the tiny pieces how you need them. Has a high cost to cut that material as well. And so we had these 550 more or less pieces of osmium, which then I had a jewelry here next door who framed them all with gold, made the golden captures on all the precious stones. And it took me long to create this entire instrument, because when I designed it, I didn't think of that I had to build it. I just thought that was just the idea, and then the customer will let you know how to decorate and how he wants to make it. Yeah. So then actually I faced another step, that I decorated on the ribs a lot, but the ribs, if you cut out, then the whole instrument doesn't work properly anymore. So then I had to create the ribs reinforced with carbon fiber, and I decided to create a new mold, completely new design, just to specifically make the sound of that instrument better. And yeah, it was much more work than I actually thought in the beginning. The instrument of the Sultan in Oman took me 8 months.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was already challenging and a lot of effort at that time. And I thought actually that this instrument, the Osmium violin, is more or less the same thing. But with these carbon fiber ribs and the osmium inlay on many positions, different position than on the instrument of the Sultan of Oman, made the whole thing more challenging, more complicated, and much more time investing, because also between the two golden purfling, instead of having round stones, I had these triangles which I cut out by hand. I didn't position them. They're all a little bit different. I just made them by eye, so it's all a little bit irregular and makes a very good appearance. I'm very satisfied how the instrument turned out. I didn't actually believe that it's possible to have an idea in your mind and being able to make it exactly that way. Yeah, I was even the end pin just took me. I thought, it's the end pin. You don't really see much when it goes around. The end pin is just small piece. You don't even consider that. End pin took me about 2 weeks to get it done, because it has inside a part which had to be turned specifically with a I don't know how you call it, like a purfling, so that you can twist on a diamond to close it, and you can open it in order that you can then put it on a small golden pin, and then you can put the violin when it is exhibited. So only that already was a lot of time. And the pegs, I thought, 2-3 days and the pegs are done. It took me 1 month to make these pegs. It was very time consuming, and I made every tiny little hole I made with the drill myself, without trying to make things like with machinery. Nowadays you can make a lot of things, but then if everything is perfect and precise, it becomes boring. Yeah. Right. So I made some wooden blocks where I put the pegs inside, and then I made certain surfaces, and then I could turn this block, and then I could by eye put the drills in. So I had these stones on the peg on the outside, a little bit irregular, but still in a way that you can, when you look at it, you say it's nicely done, but it's not super precise. Nowadays, our perception of beautiness is a little bit different than maybe, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago. Yeah.
Right. Sometimes imperfection is also a kind of perfection.
Yeah, because nowadays perfection is perceived as something cheap. Yeah. Right. Like just take a Chinese violin. They really do a great job, and I really have a lot of respect when I see what they do in China with so many instruments, and they do them all nice, and they're all finished perfect, and they look like the hood of your car, you know, shiny with perfection. That's what a customer expects for $100 US, you know. Absolutely. And then, but if you would do the same thing for somebody who spends 10, 20, 30,000, they don't want that, you know. They want something different. It has to be a little bit not so shiny, and has to be hand polished with some irregularities, and that is nowadays more perceived as something precious. Certainly now this Osmium violin I polished a lot, and it's very shiny, but still I focus to do everything by hand, cutting it by hand, and you can see it. If you look at very close, you see that, this is not regular. All these triangles, 300 of these triangles, and between there are some diamonds and rubies, sapphires, and things like this. I put them then also, so it gets a little bit more color and a little bit more joyful. But it's all by hand, without not even calculating. I just by hand cut it out, these triangles, and after all, it looks very beautiful. I'm pretty happy. I'm sorry that I cannot show you here, but it really is turned out very well. It's still on sale. 3.5 million with Italian consumption tax, 2.86 million euro without the consumption tax.
Wow. It's really. So with this, we come to the end of our first episode. We'll speak more and know more about Edgar's wonderful journey on the next episode.
Okay, thanks for listening. See you soon. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye.